So let's take a look now on the top of Lamed Zayin Amid Beis. Hahi Pilo Hu Kosher. The Mishnah only disqualifies a case of nefila. Nefila means that somehow the Ephra Apara fell onto the Mayim on its own. But if the Kohen would have intentionally hipilo to throw the Ephra through this tube, right? Because we're talking about a shfoferes into the shokes, then it would be kosher. And we would have a fulfillment of this pasuk, v'nasan olav mayim chayim. How could it be? He's doing it through a shfoferes, through a tube. Amai. The Torah says v'lokhu and v'nasan. And the pasuk v'nasan means that he's got to put it, meaning with his hands. He's got to use his bare hands. Elav shmamina. Therefore, we have to conclude that lekicha al yedei davar acher shmei lekicha. And the Gemara says that when he mixes the ashes with the water, he's got to do it actively. And even if he does it through a shfoferes, it's considered a lekicha and a nesina. And this will prove Rava's shita that lekicha yedei davar acher shmei lekicha. Another statement of Rabbah. V'yamar Rabbah lo ladut inish lulavo b'shana. When you put the lulav into the binding, don't push it down too hard and too heavy, because once you have those kaishalach, as we call them, then inevitably you're going to rip some of the leaves of the Hoshana or the Hadas. And what happens? Dilma nasrei tarfi vahavi chatzitza. When he detaches some of the leaves from the hadasim or the aravos, by virtue of pushing the lulav down, and he wasn't very careful about it, it's going to be a chatzitza. Those loose, detached leaves will interpose between his hands and the daled minim. He will be grabbing on to those leaves. Now, I want to just point out that Rashi seems to learn a little bit differently than what I presented, and that the chatzitza here is not a chatzitza between his hands and the daled minim, but rather between the daled minim themselves, meaning between the lulav and the hadas, or the hadas and the arava. And Rashi faces the following issue. If your lulav tzarech agad, and then eged is absolutely critical, then I understand Rabba's concern about a chatzitza, because you've in effect undermined the eged, because between the lulav and the arava you have hadassim leaves, or the other way around. So Rashi says that even if I don't hold lulav tzarech eged, but nevertheless, I do require holding all three minim in one hand. And those three minim have to be attached to each other so that this is considered a lekich of all three minim, even without eged. An amazing chiddush. And that justifies Rabba's concern about the loose leaves that were detached when he pushed the lulav down. Rav Amar, min b'mino eino chotzetz. You want to set up a chatzitza here between the various minim? You're talking about leaves from those minim. Leaves from those minim could not will not serve as a chatzitza to separate the minim. Omar Rabba lo ligus inish lulava boshana. The mishtayre hutza. Behavi chatzitza. Sometimes you find that the lulav is a little bit too long, and you want to cut down some of the lulav on the bottom. Says Rabba, he should not do so, because he then is going to detach some of the leaves of the lulav, and that will be caught in the kaishalach, in the binding, and it would be a chatzitza. And again, Rav Omar, in a chotzetz, Rabbi, you don't have to be concerned with the leaves of the lulav, because the leaves of the lulav are not a foreign extraneous min that would serve as a chatzitza. Min b'mino eno chotzetz. V'yamar Rabba hadas shel mitzvah asul riach bo. Since you use the hadas for the mitzvah, it becomes muktzah l'mitzvasa. It is absolutely exclusively dedicated as a mitzvah Hashem. And the Gemara, if you recall back on Daf Tes, derived from a pasuk in Chagiga, an equation between Succah and Chagiga, that just like the Torah says, Hashem, you're not allowed to benefit from a korban Chagiga, so too you're not allowed to benefit from a Succah, because the Succah is a cheftzah shel mitzvah. And so too hadas is a cheftzah shel mitzvah. And therefore to smell the hadasim is prohibited. Now here we have a problem, because Rabbah says that esrog shel mitzvah mutal ariach. You're allowed to smell an esrog. What's the difference between an esrog and a hadas? If the Torah says there's something called muktzah mitzvah, so you have singularly earmarked this object for the mitzvah, you're not allowed to get benefit from the cheftzah shel mitzvah, why does Rabbah permit you to smell the esrog? My timer. What is the justification for this distinction between the hadasim and the esrog? Hadas de l'reicha koi. What benefit does a person get from hadas if not the smell of the hadas? So the pleasant fragrance of the hadas is what the hadas is dedicated for. And now you dedicated this hadas for a mitzvah. Is ki akte merecha akte. You have excluded that hana, that benefit that the object is earmarked for. The hadas is dedicated for reach. You now singled it out as a cheftzah shel mitzvah. That reach is now prohibited. But esrog is an edible esrog. The lachila kod. The esrog is not primarily earmarked for smelling and fragrance, but rather for eating. And therefore, when you designated it as a cheftzah shel mitzvah to exclude its primary benefit, then me'achila akte, but me'recha lo akte. He did not exclude anything other than eating the esrog, but he's allowed to smell the esrog. And this means that the primary hana for which an object is dedicated, that hana becomes prohibited under the law of Lashem, under the law of huktzah l'mitzvos. Now it's very interesting. The Sfas Emes wants to know whether or not you make the bracha on smelling peros with regard to an esrog if you smell the fragrance of the esrog. The bracha of hanosein reach tov v'peros is designated for the primary hana. So if you have hadasim and you smell hadasim, then you make the bracha hanosein reach tov v'peros, because that's what it's designated for. But in the case of an esrog, which is designated for achila, perhaps we should omit the bracha of hanosein reach tov v'peros. And this issue became a major contention amongst the Achronim, and therefore the poskim say it's not such a great idea to smell the esrog because we don't know whether you should be making a bracha on the esrog. But as far as huktzah l'mitzvaso is concerned, the Gemara in the name of Rabbah permits. Weiter. Omar Rabbah hadas b'mechubar mutar la riachba. Now we're learning Masechet Shabbos. We're no longer learning Sukkah. And on Shabbos, the question is, when you have a benefit from something that's mechubar lakarka, it's growing in the ground, then there's always a fear that by benefiting from the object, you may inadvertently pluck it out and detach it from the ground, violating meleches ksira. And Rabbah differentiates between the hadas b'mechubar and the esrog b'mechubar. In the case of hadas b'mechubar, mutar la riachba. In the case of esrog b'mechubar, asur la riachba. It's counterintuitive. I would have said that if any of the two are asur, then certainly the hadas should be asur. Why is he being lenient with regard to the hadas? My timer. Hadas de la riachkoi isharis le lo asi lemigze. What it means is that we enjoy the smell of the hadas even when it's growing on the tree. He doesn't really benefit in any way by detaching it. He's not tempted to cut it down. And therefore, there's no chash that it'll violate the Shabbos. But esrog de la achila koi, an esrog which is designated for purpose of hanas achila, isharis le osi lemigze. We're afraid, and the Rabbanu were choshesh, that if he starts smelling the esrog, now it's megare his taiva. It stimulates his desire to do what? Well, what's the next level after smelling an esrog? It's to eat the esrog. And therefore, he might be tempted to pluck the esrog off the tree and violate malacha d'oraisa of ketzir. Yom Rav, another statement of Rav. Lulav v'yamin v'esrog b'smol. The lulav should be taken in the right hand and the esrog in the left. Again, counterintuitive. We love the esrog. Should take it in the right hand. My time and no. Hani tlosa mitzvos, a high chad mitzvah. When he takes the lulav, which is bound together with the aravim, the aravas and the adasim, he's taking 3 mitzvahs. And if you have a choice between 3 and 1, leave the esrog for your left hand and take the 3 in your right hand. Now, our premise here in understanding Rabbah's statement is that we have one mitzvah to take the Daled Minim, and 3/4 of that mitzvah is fulfilled by the lulav, meaning the lulav be'eged, and now we have a shita of Rabbeinu Chananel that if he took the lulav in his left hand and the esrog in his right hand, he's not yotzei the mitzvah. Very difficult. I could understand lechatchila you want to give more kavod to the lulav, but to say that therefore it undermines his kiyum mitzvah in a case where he took the lulav in his left hand, that's a pillar. Amalei Reb Yirmiyah Reb Zrika. My tam lo mevarchim ela al netilas lulav. Why did the Chazal establish the bracha on the lulav? And he answers, this Reb Zrika, hoil v'gava mikulam. Strange answer. It's the tallest of all the minim. Okay. Depends exactly where he's holding the lulav. So the Gemara says, why doesn't he lift up the esrog above the lulav and make the bracha on the esrog? So he said to Rabbi Yirmiyah, hoil ubemino gava mikulam. We look at the way it grows. And the lulav is the tallest of the minim in its original natural state of growth. So here I want to share with you an insight of the Meiri. The Meiri says that the tallness of the lulav, that per se, does not necessarily deserve a bracha. Just because it's naturally taller, therefore what? But we have to induce and invoke more homiletical interpretations of the Medrash. The Medrash says that on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, there's a din between Esav and Yaakov, between the nation of Israel and the nations of the world. And if they're up, chas v'sholom, but when we're up, they're down. And the Gemara says, the Medrash says, that we don't know who was Yotze B'dimus, who won the case in the judgment on high. On Sukkot, when we walk around with the lulav is a symbol of a flag of victory. And apparently back in the day, it was quite common that the victorious nation would demonstrate in a public demonstration their success, their victory, by waving a flag. Our flag is the lulav. And therefore, the lulav being the tallest means the lulav is the flag that can be seen at a distance. We make the bracha on the lulav. The Torah Tmima adds a very interesting point, that why is the bracha Shakichan Tzosisfano al Netilas lulav and not on Lekichas lulav? I think I may have mentioned this to you in the past. It's because when you talk about a victory flag, that's called waving, that's called Netila, as opposed to Lekich, which just means picking it up. Mishnah says, V'hechan hayu minanim. The Mishnah assumes that there's a mitzvah of nanuim, and that's going to be fulfilled during the recitation of Hallel. The Mishnah doesn't even establish that there is such a thing. The Mishnah wants to know where in Hallel should we be doing the nanuim, the waving of the lulav. And the Mishnah answers, Behodu Lashem Tchila Uvaso. That in Kapitel number Kuf Yud Ches, the pasuk Hodul Hashem opens the Kapitel and closes the Kapitel, appears twice. And those are the 2 points in which we are thanking Hashem and we're reciting Hodul Hashem Kitov, and we do the Nanun. Not only that, but Uba'ana Hashem Hoshiana. Now at this point, the pasuk in the same chapter of Kuf Yud Ches, but now we're in pasuk Chaf Hey. It says Ona Hashem Hoshiana, Ona Hashem Hatzlichana, and we do the Nanuim when we recite Ona Hashem Hoshiana. And now the Nanuim take on a whole different complexion. They're no longer Nanuim of Hallel, but Nanuim of Bakasha Utfila. Divrei Beis Hillel, Beit Shammai Omrim, why don't you be consistent here? Afba Ana Hashem Atzlichana. The end of the pasuk is a request, a petition to God to bring us success. Why do you limit your Nanuim to the beginning of the pasuk on Hashem Hoshiana? Now, the Mefarshim try to defend Beis Hillel against the attack of Beit Shammai. What is the difference between Ona Hashem Hoshiana and Ona Hashem Hatzlichana? And they base themselves on a pasuk in Divrei Yomi. Oz Yiranenu Atzei Hayar Milifnei Hashem, and that is a reference, an allusion to the lulav and the Talmidim. And then the pasuk says, "Hodul Hashem ki tov ki lo amchasto," and then it says, "V'imru hoshienu Hashem yishenu." Save us and give us salvation. So, in other words, the pasuk of Oz Yiranenu Atzei Ayar, which is the basis for Nanuim of the Lulav, ends with Hoshienu Elokei Yishenu. And that's clearly a reference to Ana Hashem Hoshiana. But during Ana Hashem Atzlichana, there's no Nanuim. Amar Rabbi Akiva, Sofer HaYisi B'Rabban Gamliel Rabbi Yoshua. I was being Mekayim, what's called Shimush Talmidei Chachamim, and I was scrutinizing my two great Rebbeim, the two great Tanaim, Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Gamliel, and I was watching them as they recited Hallel, and they deviated from the normal minhag. What was the minhag of the entire people? Minanim es lulaveim. They would wave their lulav like Beit Shammai in both Ana Hashem Hoshiana and in Ana Hashem Atzlichana. But these Tanaim would follow the ruling of Beis Hillel. V'lo ninu ela b'Ana Hashem Hoshiana. In other words, they would not accept the practice of Beit Shammai. They would insist on implementing the Pesach of Beis Hillel. So the Gemara asks the question now that it asks at the beginning of Shas, right? It says, Ne'emasai korin es hashma b'arvin. So the Gemara immediately asks, what do you mean korin? You didn't even tell me that you have to read Shema b'arvin, and then you ask Ne'emasai. Here also, Nanuim Madikar Shmei. You're telling me that somewhere in Hallel we have to do Nanuim. When did you establish that there's a chiyuv of Nanuim? And the Gemara answers, Hasam Kai. That we have to attach our Mishnah to an earlier Mishnah on Daf Chav Tes Amud Beis, and the Mishnah says Kol Lulav Sheyesh Bo Shlosha Tfachim, that it's not enough for the lulav to be 3 tfachim high like the aravos and noshanos, but Kidei L'Nanei, you have to add another tefach, a 4th tefach to the height of the lulav for the minimum height, in order to achieve Nanuim. Now the Ka'amar, now our Mishnah, as a continuation of that Mishnah, asks the question, Heichan Minanin. Where do they wave? Nan Hasam. And now the Gemara quotes a Mishnah Menachos of Tnufa. Now, Tnufa is a requirement in Karban Shalomim in general, but there's a special Tnufa on Chag HaShavuos of the Kivsei Atzeres with the Shtei Alechem. The Shtei Alechem is the central carbon on Shavuos, on Chag Atzeres, and it has to be accompanied by Kivsei Atzeres. And the two of them together have to be integrated with a Tnufa, a waving. Eitzaduro said, the Mishnah Menachos asks, how do you wave the Kivsei Atzeres together with the Shtei Alechem? Meiniach Shtei Alechem al gabe Shnei Akvasim. He places the Shtei Alechem on top of the Shnei Kvasim. Umeiniach Yodo Tachteim. Umenith. And the Kohen will place his hands underneath the Kivsei Atzeres, which are in turn underneath the Shtei Alechem, and Menith. Now this Tnufa, as described in great detail by the Mishnah Menachos, becomes the paradigm for Nanuim. Molech umevi male umorit. There are 2 fundamental parts to Tnufa, to the mitzvah of Tnufa. One is called Molech Umevi, and the other is called Male Umorit. And Nemar, we derive this from a pasuk. This pasuk has to do with the Miluim, the Shivas Yimei Miluim, the Shmonos Yimei Miluim of the inauguration of Aaron Ubana. And there had to be tnufa, a waving. And the Torah describes the tnufa as asher hunaf v'asher huram, that there are two parts to the waving. There's something called hunaf, and there's something called huram. There's raising, that's called huram, and there's hunaf, which is waving. And waving is what's called molich umevi. Uram means mala umorit. And this pasuk in Shmos Chavtes, in the context of the chinuch, the inauguration of Aaron Upanov, becomes now our paradigm for all cases of tnufa, otherwise known as nanuim, in the case of lulav. And Rashi here, Kedelin Aneabo, about 15 lines up before the end of the Amud, Rashi says, Mitzvah l'nanea kedel kamon, lots are ruchos ros utlolim roim. In other words, we have to ward off the harmful winds and damaging dews. The mitzvah is done l'shem shamayim, and we indicate l'shem shamayim, first of all, by the four directions, because God owns all the four directions, and that's called molech umevi. And God is above and below, and that's called male umori. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, molech umevi lemi sha'arba rucho shalo. It's all dedicated to He with a capital H, who has dominion over all four directions. Malu morid lemisha shamayim baritz shalo. V'marava masnu hachi. Amar Rab Chama bar Ukva. Amar Rab Yossi bar Chanina. Molech umevi kidei latza ruchos ros, and Malu morid kidei latza tlolim roim. Okay, Rabbosai, this is where we're going to stop. Tomorrow, obviously, there won't be a Daf Yomi shiur, but I will, Mirz Hashem, record the Daf Yomi, and it'll be up on YU Torah. And that's going to be Lamed Ches. And Mirz Hashem, B'li Neder, on Sunday, Yom Rishon, we'll do Lamed Tes. I'll take this opportunity to wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much.
Shabbos. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.